Chapter 1. He woke shouting. One long animal sound that ripped the dark. No, no. Bolt upright in the narrow bed, Harlan clawed for the blankets as if they were a lifeline. Sweat soaked the wool. Cold bit between his shoulders where the cabin logs let the wind through. His breath came hard and fast, chest rattling before his head had even cleared. The dream peeled away like frost off glass, leaving only the ache, the panic, the smell he would not name. He didn't try. Not tonight. Not ever. It was one of those dreams that lived in the bones, old, patient, and hungry. And when it passed, it left him tasting iron, fists curled for a fight that wasn't there. He swung his legs out of bed, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. A long breath pushed through him, slow and steady, as though he could force the weight back down. His fingers traced the ridge of the scar across his brow, small, out of place, foreign on a man who lived by his own hands. Outside, the pine sighed. Inside, the coals in the stove were dead, and the silence heavy. When he finally lifted his head, the cabin came back into focus. The stone fireplace sat cold, its iron arm and blackened pots hanging still. Off to the side, the small iron-doored oven, his pride when he built it, waited dark. Rugs worn thin by years of boots lay scattered across plank floors he had hewn himself. The shelves by the walls sagged with cans, sacks of flour, jars of beans. Above the counter, a Coleman stove rested, its metal dulled by use, while the pans overhead knocked softly against the bar head hung from the beams. His books waited too, lined on their shelf, dog-eared novels beside battered guides on trapping, building, surviving. He turned toward the window. The morning light was just breaking over the ridges, spilling across Hollowtop Lake far below. Clouds dragged shadows across the green valley floor, and the line of peaks cut the sky sharp. Everything here was his, cut, hammered, nailed, stacked, stitched. A life built by hand. And yet, sitting there with his scar throbbing faintly and his breath not quite steady, the cabin felt too quiet, as if it too were waiting for the next nightmare. Harlan pushed himself up, joints stiff in the cold. The floorboards bit at his bare feet as he crossed to the stone hearth. He crouched, struck a match, and coaxed dry shavings into flame. The fire caught, smoke curling into the chimney, the first crack of warmth pushing back the night chill. He set water on the small Coleman stove, the hiss of propane filling the cabin. By the time the fire in the hearth was steady, the tin mug in his hands was breathing steam. He carried it to the table, sat down heavy, and let the heat bleed into his palms before taking the first swallow. From the shelf he pulled a stub of pencil and a folded scrap of paper. Supplies, always supplies. Beans, flour, coffee, kerosene. He counted out what little was left on the pantry shelf, noting each in his tight hand. Then his eyes flicked to the stack of pelts folded neat in the corner. Beaver, fox, a few coyote. Enough to trade, maybe more if the price was fair. At the bottom of the page he wrote one more line, slower than the rest. Hatchet, Damascus steel. He stared at the words a moment, the corner of his mouth twitching almost to a smile. 3 days' walk. Snow still deep in the cuts, but worth it. This trip was more than resupply. This one, he had something waiting. The coffee was gone before he realized it. He set the tin mug down, the scrape against wood loud in the still cabin, and pulled on his boots. The leather was cracked, laces stiff, but they'd see him through another trip. He stepped outside into the cut of late March air. Snow lay crusted in the trees, heavy on the boughs, the whole mountainside holding its breath in white silence. His breath hung thick before him as he crunched a path to the shed. The door gave its familiar groan when he pulled it wide. Inside, the smell of pine and old smoke mixed with the faint musk of firs. And there it waited, his sled. Long, low, weathered smooth by years of hauling, the wood darkened with use. It had followed him over ridges and across frozen creeks, steady as any companion. He rested a hand on its worn rail a moment, as though greeting an old friend. One by one he stacked the loads, the bundles of pelts folded tight and tied with rawhide, a sack of flour, coffee and beans sealed in tins, the canvas tent, his bedroll, the small stove and a pot wrapped in cloth. Each piece found its place, the sled taking the weight without complaint. When he stepped back, the sight of it steadied him. The sled was ready. The trail. Chapter 2. The sled's runners cut shallow grooves in the crusted snow as Harlan dragged it out from the shed. The rawhide lashings creaked, the weight settling into its rhythm. He paused at the rise just beyond the cabin, letting the rope rest across his shoulder. Turning back, he took in the sight he always carried but rarely lingered on. The cabin stood tight against the slope, logs darkened by weather, stone chimney breathing a faint ribbon of smoke into the bright air. Behind it, the ridges rolled away sharp and endless, and Hollowtop Lake gleamed far below, black-blue in the cradle of pines. Snow lay pure across the branches, unbroken except for his trail, the whole mountainside locked in stillness. No voices, no roads, no one else to claim this view. It was his. Every nail and notch in the cabin, every tree he'd cut, every stone he'd hauled and stacked by hand. For a moment, he let himself feel it. The quiet pride, the solitude, the kind of beauty a man could vanish into. Then he shifted the rope, tightened his grip, and turned his face toward the valley. The trail waited, and with it, the long miles to town. The rope bit his shoulder as he eased the sled down the slope, boots crunching through the crust. The air thinned as he dropped into the trees, tall spruce closing out the wide valley sky. He didn't need to think about the way. His feet knew each turn, each cut of stone, each switchback through the timber. He could have walked it blind, and in storms past he nearly had. By late afternoon the shadows stretched long. A flicker of motion caught his eye, gray against the snow. Harlan swung the .22 from the sled, steadied it in practiced hands, and cracked a single shot. The rabbit twisted once and fell still. He knelt, worked quickly with the knife, hands steady from years of the same chore. The meat went into the sled, the hide folded neat. Nothing wasted. At the bottom flats, the light was already dimming. He chose a spot where the trees broke just enough for a small fire. The tent went up in minutes, canvas taut against the poles. He scouted the ground, gathered deadfall, and soon a low blaze hissed and popped under the iron pot. The rabbit simmered with what he found near camp, wild onions crushed sharp between his fingers, dandelion roots scrubbed clean, and the first green nettle shoots softened by heat. The broth thickened, smoke curling into the branches, carrying the sharp bite of onion and the sweet earth of root. Harlan ate slowly, each spoonful warming him from the inside out. The woods pressed close, but the fire held its circle against the dark. When the pot was empty, he leaned back on his bedroll, drew a small harmonica from his coat pocket, and let the notes drift low through the trees. The tune wasn't for anyone but him, simple, old, a line of sound rising with the smoke into the cold night. The last note lingered, then faded into the dark timber. Harlan lowered the harmonica, thumbed the metal clean on his sleeve, and slipped it back into his pocket. The fire burned low, the stew pot empty beside it. He stretched out on the bedroll beneath the canvas roof and let the crackle of coals and the slow sigh of wind in the trees pull him under. Sleep came quick, but it didn't hold him gentle. Oh God, no. He lurched upright, voice raw in the still night. Sweat slicked his skin, the bedroll twisted around him. Breath came hard, ragged, breaking into sharp sobs he couldn't choke down. Hot tears cut across his face, stinging against the cold until he swiped them away with the back of his hand, angry at himself for letting them fall. From the trees outside, wings thundered. A scatter of birds burst into the air, their cries sharp against the silence as they fled deeper into the forest. The sound faded fast, leaving the camp quiet again, too quiet. For a moment he was back there. The smoke, the fire, the scream cut short. Then the trees sharpened in the dawnlight, the tent roof above him, the dying fire at his side. Harlan scrubbed both hands over his face, dragging in air until the ground steadied beneath him. He looked around. Tent, sled, the same endless trees he'd known all his life. Montana, not war. Snow underfoot, not sand. He closed his eyes and forced his breath slower. The dream always left its mark. The forest had gone still again. Harlan sat in it a moment longer, chest rising and falling until his breath found its rhythm. Then he pushed himself up, shaking off the last of the dream. He stoked the coals just enough to heat a tin mug of coffee, the bitter steam curling into the cold dawn. A swallow cut through the taste of sleep and ash, steadied him. When it was gone, he doused the fire, scattered the embers and stamped the ground flat. The tent came down quick, canvas folded tight and lashed to the sled. Bedroll, stove, and pot all packed in their places with the same neat care as the night before. By the time the rope settled back across his shoulder, the eastern ridges were lit with pale fire. Snow glared white, hard and untouched. Harlan leaned into the pull, boots crunching. The sled slid smooth behind him, cutting a new line through the silence. It was going to be a long day. The trail leveled as the forest thickened, the slope behind him now hidden by the pines. Down here, the air carried more warmth, heavy with the damp of thawing ground. He rolled his shoulders against the rope, already missing the sting of the high ridges. The cold up there cut clean, a sharp edge in every breath. Down here it pressed closer, softer, almost heavy. Sunlight broke through the branches in long shafts, lighting snowmelt as it dripped from limb to limb. A rustle off to the right caught his ear, a whitetail bounding away before he could even think to raise the rifle. He let it go. Deer meant meat, but deer also meant weight, and town was no place to drag venison. Maybe on the way back, if luck turned. Not long after, he saw a dark form picking through the underbrush, a wild turkey. This one he raised the .22 for, steady and sure. A single shot cracked the silence. The bird dropped. He was on it fast, knife working clean, hands practiced. Dressed and bagged, it went into a sack with a scoop of snow packed around the meat, protein enough for the next few days. Later, moving along a low stretch of wet ground, he found more. Berries clung small and wrinkled to the brambles, overwintered, but still good. He picked them carefully, stained fingers lifting them to the sack. Near the waterline he dug at cattails, pulling up thick rhizomes, washing the mud away in the creek before wrapping them in cloth. By evening the sled carried the day's gain: turkey, berries, and roots. Supper was set, and the trail behind him was quiet. As the light faded, Harlan chose a dry rise above the creek. He staked the tent, pulled in armfuls of wood, and soon had a fire snapping steady under a low sky streaked red. The pot went on with the turkey meat, berries, and cattail root, the broth rich and sharp with the wild onion he'd pocketed earlier. The smell filled the camp, sweet smoke rising into the branches. As it simmered, he leaned back on his bedroll, eyes on the fire's core. Tomorrow by noon he'd be in town. And waiting there, the hatchet. Not just any blade. This one he had dreamed of for years, drawn out on scrap paper, shaped from memory and imagination both. Modeled after the old Viking axes he'd studied, but built for a working man's hand. Broad edge, balanced weight, steel folded true, so it would hold and keep holding. He'd asked the blacksmith to etch the designs into the head, a mark of his own choosing, something that spoke of strength and endurance. The haft shaped for grip, the whole of it meant to be more than a tool. It would be an heirloom, a companion, the kind of thing that outlasted its owner. He could almost feel it in his hand already. Damascus steel, layered and folded, until the grain showed like flowing water. Each line a testament to fire and hammer. Not cold iron, not some factory edge dulled after a season, but a blade made to last a lifetime. Polished wood for the haft, dark-grained and shaped to his grip. weight balanced just forward of center, the bite ready to sink deep and true. The etched designs were his own, pulled from marks he had sketched on paper, now carved permanent into the steel. Not just decoration, but identity. His mark. It was more than a tool, more than a weapon. It was the kind of thing a man could hand down, or be remembered by. A piece of himself forged into shape, hammered until it would never break. He pictured the first swing, the way the head would split clean through spruce, the edge ringing sharp in the winter air. And he knew the moment he held it, it would be the finest thing he had ever owned. The fire burned low, embers settling to a red hush. Harlan stretched out on his bedroll, the night pressing close around the tent. The forest was quiet, save for the crack of ice shifting in the creek, and the faint sigh of wind through pine. He pulled the blanket to his shoulders, eyes fixed on the fading glow. Tomorrow, by noon, the hatchet would be in his hands. With that thought, steady and warm, he let the dark take him. The next day the trees thinned, giving way to open slope. The land dropped fast, stone and brush underfoot, the ridges folding down into the wide Madison Valley. Harlan leaned into the rope, boots careful on the shale, the sled bumping behind him. By mid-morning, he cleared the last of the timber, and the world opened wide. The river cut silver through the flats, looping and curling in the sun. Green ribbons of fields stretched along its banks, broken by circles of irrigated earth, the smell of wet soil strong after the dry heights above. The mountains stood behind him now, jagged blue in the distance. The air down here felt heavy, soft with warmth, carrying the faint scent of sage and cut hay. He missed the clean knife-edge cold of the high ridges, but the long miles ahead pulled him forward. A dirt track wound into the valley floor, tire ruts hardened by frost and thaw. He followed it, sled sliding easier now on the flat ground. Meadowlarks flashed from the fence posts, their calls sharp and bright against the morning hush. By noon the first rooftops showed, then the grid of streets. Smoke lifted from chimneys, the sprawl of Ennis set tight against the river. Harlan drew the sled past barns, past the outlying cabins, and into town proper. 3 days on the trail, and he had made it. The hatchet waited. Chapter 3. Ennis smelled the same. Wood smoke, fryer grease, the faint tang of horses, and that clean rush of river cutting through it all. Harlan slowed his pull on the sled as Main Street opened before him. The familiar row of false fronts and swinging signs he'd known since boyhood. The fly shops still dressed their windows with hand-tied patterns in neat rows. Cafes he remembered by scent, more than name. The bar doors thudded open and shut, spilling laughter and the sound of boots on old wood floors. Beyond it all stretched the same backdrop of ranchland, fences rolling toward the Madison, and peaks stacked blue beyond. He'd been gone long enough to notice the new. A gallery where an outfitter used to stand, Willie's Distillery bold on the corner, lodges fresh painted where roadside motels once leaned tired and gray. More people too, bright jackets, easy gaits, tourists unaware the weather here could turn cruel in a breath. Shifting the rope from his shoulder, Harlan crossed the packed street toward the Sportsman's Lodge. The sign hadn't changed, letters sun-faded, wood-weathered, but the paint was fresh enough to show business was good. He'd take a cabin for the night, stow his gear, and give his shoulders a rest. The bell over the door gave a dull ring as he stepped inside. Warm air carried the smell of grease, whiskey, and wood polish, a welcome contrast to the bite outside. Heads turned for a moment, then went back to their drinks and talk. Behind the counter, the lodge owner straightened with a grin. "Well, I'll be damned. Long time no see," Harlan slayed. Harlan gave a small nod, setting the sled rope by his boots. "Been a while." The man reached under the counter and lifted a narrow taped package wrapped in brown paper. "This came through, addressed from Elsa's Edge. Figured you'd be by." Harlan's hand closed over it, grip firm, almost too steady. Inside, the weight was exactly what he'd been waiting for. That old itch in his chest eased, though his face showed nothing but a faint flicker of thanks. "Appreciate it," he said. "Cabin's ready for you. Same spot as always. Keys on the ring." Harlan took it, tipped his head once more, and hauled the sled toward the back cabins. The warmth and noise of the lodge faded behind him, leaving only the cold air and the weight of the package in his hands. He didn't look down at it again. Not yet. The cabin door shut behind him with a heavy thud, muting Main Street. Harlan dragged the sled across the floorboards, rawhide creaking, and set it near the wall. The pelts stayed stacked out front on the deck, the cold clinging to them. The package lay on the table where he'd set it. Plain brown paper and twine, marked only by the careful print of Elsa's edge. His hand rested on it a long moment before he pulled his knife and sliced the string clean. The paper fell away slow, as if the unwrapping mattered as much as what waited inside. Steel caught the lamplight first, bright, alive, patterned in waves like flowing water. Damascus, folded and hammered until the grain itself was art. Along the beard and cheek of the blade, deep etchings ran black against silver, curling knots and sharp lines that spoke of old blood and older fire. The haft followed, dark wood carved in a braid of beasts and lines, each figure twisted and alive beneath his palm. The grain ran true, polished to a dull glow, shaped to fit a man's hand as if it had always belonged there. At the end, the root flared rough and gnarled, as though the tree itself had fought to stay whole. Harlan lifted it slowly, feeling the balance settle into his grip. Forward weighted, eager to bite, but steady, like it wanted work, not show. He turned it once, the edge whispering through the air, a sound too thin to hear, but felt in his teeth. For the first time in months, maybe years, the corner of his mouth tugged near a smile. This was no store-bought tool, no factory edge to dull and die. This was his. Forged for him, marked by his choice, hammered into being by fire and will. A companion, an heirloom, a weapon, and a promise in one. He set it across his knees, fingers tracing the etched lines in the steel, and let its weight anchor him. Outside, the town carried on. Voices, boots, the faint cry of the river. Inside, for Harlan Slade, the world narrowed to a single edge. He stepped back onto the porch, the cold air biting sharper after the cabin's warmth. From his coat pocket, he pulled a battered track phone and thumbed it awake. Signal bars thin but steady enough for a call. Before he could dial, the sound came. Low at first, a thump in the chest more than the ear. Then it rose, steady, heavy, that unmistakable whup, whup, whup. No man who'd served could ever forget. A Huey. His head turned skyward. Over the rooftops it came, olive green against the hard blue sky, skids glinting in the sun. Even from the ground he could see the scars, small round holes stitched along the panels, patched but never erased. His stomach tightened. He knew them, knew what they were, and why they'd been left. Rider. The bird slid low across Ennis, rotors throwing down a wash of wind that rattled signs and stirred snow from the roofs. Harlan didn't wave, didn't call out. Just watched, knowing Ryder wouldn't see him from that height anyway. Twin bridges lay down the valley, and Ryder had runs to make. His father's business. His father's bird. Agent Orange had taken the old man slow, but Ryder kept the Huey alive, kept it flying. He even carried the bullet holes from his father's last mission, not out of neglect, but respect. The sound faded, leaving the sky too still. Harlan stood a moment longer, then drew a slow breath and thumbed the track phone back to life. The Uber would be there soon enough. He glanced toward the valley where the Huey had gone, a small ache settling in his chest. He'd hoped to catch Ryder this trip, trade a few words at least, but that would have to wait. Twin bridges had him, and Harlan wouldn't. Not this time. He slipped the phone into his pocket, looked toward the sled stacked on the porch, and set his mind back to work. First stop, Shedhorn Sports to sell the pelts. Then Madison Foods for beans and flour. Family Dollar for the odds and ends. Business before anything else. By the time the Uber dropped him back at the lodge, the sun had slipped low behind the ridges. The errands were done. The pelts sold. The money already spent on supplies and a few small comforts. He'd nodded to a couple familiar faces along Main Street. Old neighbors, shopkeepers, men who gave him the same small-town smile, and nothing more. No one asked where he'd been or how he lived. That was Ennis, people remembered, but they didn't pry. The sled waited where he'd left it, stacked and ready. He shouldered the bags, carried them inside, and set them neat by the table. The cabin felt quieter after the noise of town. Chapter 4. Harlan rose with the gray light. The town just starting to stir beyond the cabin walls. His gear was already packed neat by the sled, bags stacked and waiting. He ran a hand once more over the hatchet where it rested on the table, then slid it into its canvas wrap and tied it down. The cabin door shut behind him with a heavy thud. He turned the key in the lock, a small click that felt more final than it should. Boots crunching on packed snow, he hauled the sled back toward the lodge. Inside, warmth struck quick, grease and coffee thick in the air, pans clattering behind the counter. He set the key on the worn wood. "Cabin's clear," he said. The keeper nodded. "Top square. You eatin' before you head out?" "Plate of bacon and eggs. Bread if you've got it." He ate without hurry. Eggs fried hard, bacon curled at the edges, bread still warm from the oven. A mug of black coffee steamed beside the plate. Simple, greasy, perfect. The kind of meal that reminded him of kitchens long gone. When the plate was clean, he slid a few bills beneath it, gave a nod toward the counter, and stepped back into the cold. The noise of town fell behind as he crossed the last of the roads, sled rasping on frozen dirt. Ahead, the ground turned rough. Frost-heaved ruts, slick patches of ice, gullies cut by thaw. The rope bit deep into his shoulder as the sled jerked and snagged, but he leaned into it, boots steady. Rugged going. It always was. Leaving Ennis. A shallow slope opened before him, brush and stone lining the grade. He eased the sled down, boots careful. Halfway, the land curled up sudden, just enough to lift the runners, then dropped again, sending the load into a quick dip that tugged hard on the rope. The jolt pulled a memory with it. Thrill Hill. Back in high school, he and Ryder used to run that stretch of county road, the one with the rise and dip halfway down. They'd hit it fast in beat-up cars, the whole load screaming as the tires left the ground for a breath. Stomachs would float, laughter would spill, and for a second it felt like flying. He remembered taking it in his old Chevy Sten, the one with the wooden flatbed he and his dad had built. He'd hit the dip too hard, faster than sense allowed. The frame snapped clean through, left the truck crumpled in the gravel. Ryder had pulled up not long after, laughing so hard he couldn't breathe, while Harlan kicked at the dirt and swore. Stupid, reckless, and perfect. The sled bumped back into rhythm, runners rasping against the frozen ground. Harlan's mouth tightened, half smile, half frown. Just the ghost of a time when the weight was lighter. He shifted the rope on his shoulder and kept walking. The trail bent through the trees, then opened into a clearing. Broad ground lay bare before him, ringed by spruce and pine. The snow thinned and patchy where the sun had worked. By late spring this place would be alive with wildflowers, paintbrush, lupine, balsam roots scattered in color across the rise. Zing it now, pale grass and crusted snow. It reminded him of another field years back. In high school there'd been in a wide open patch outside town, not much more than grass and flowers, with a rough U-shaped drive cut through it. They'd build bonfires there, stack wood high, set it blazing, flames throwing sparks into the night. Beer in hand, engines lined along the track, everyone laughing loud enough to shake the dark. He remembered one winter night clear as day, the fire big, the crowd rowdy, when headlights eased along the tree line. Then they snapped off. A shout ripped through the group. "Cops!" Engines kicked over, tires clawed the snow, and the whole pack scattered in a frenzy of taillights. Blue strobes flickered in the trees behind, too late to catch anyone moving fast enough. The sled runners hissed across the clearing, pulling him back to the present. The snow cracked underfoot, the smell of thaw pushing up through the cold. He shifted the rope higher and pressed on. The woods closed in again, quiet, but for the sled and the occasional wing beat above. Then movement caught his eye, a deer, head down, easing through the brush. A good whitetail, heavy across the shoulders. Harlan slid the .36 from his back, the stock worn smooth from years of carry. He crouched, steadied his breathing, lined the bead just behind the shoulder. The woods went still with him. Then his boot found a branch. A sharp crack split the air. The deer's head shot up, white tail flared. Harlan squeezed. The rifle roared, and the forest exploded. Birds blasted from the trees in a storm of wings, cries scattering into the sky. When the echo died, the deer was gone. He lowered the rifle, listening as the silence folded back in. Missed meat, wasted round. Nothing left but the hollow aftertaste of gunpowder and a trail of tracks already fading into timber. He slung the rifle and took up the rope again. The woods always felt different after a shot, emptier, holding its breath. His boots found rhythm, and with it, his mind drifted. He thought of the old '67 VW Bug, had run through high school. Black, beat to hell, and more often pushed than driven. The points fouled if you looked at them wrong. The voltage regulator never lasted, and half the time he coasted it into shop class instead of driving it. One morning he tried to make a loop, swing the car out front of the school and bring it back around to the shop. Only it wouldn't move right. He'd mashed the pedal, the engine screamed, and then, bang! A blast so loud it shook the glass. He'd blown the cylinders clean out. When he looked up, oil pooling under the car. Both floors of the school were lined with faces at the windows. Every kid craning to see, laughing their asses off while he sat behind the wheel, smoke drifting from the Bug like a chimney. That car followed him the rest of high school. People never let him forget it. Every time he walked into a party, someone would raise a beer and grin to the Bug, and the crowd would cheer like it was legend instead of a busted heap of steel. More laughter, more stories spun off it, the kind that stuck around long after the car was gone. He grunted, half a curse, half a laugh, as the sled rasped on behind him. Stupid car. Stupid kid. But it was a piece of him all the same. The land began to climb, the day's flat ground giving way to the first hard edge of the mountains. The sled fought him more with each step, runners catching in crust and sliding sideways on ice. Halfway up a ridge, the load broke loose. The sled skidded, cutting a shallow groove across the slope. Harlan braced, rope burning against his shoulder, until it finally ground to a halt. When he looked, the nose pointed square in the direction he needed anyway. Poor luck. He huffed, half laugh, half breath, and shifted the rope back into place. Sometimes, the mountain did the work for a man. Another mile, and the trees thickened, closing him into a pocket where the snow lay deeper but the wind broke clean. A rise in the ground gave just enough shelter, flat enough for a tent and close enough to deadfall for the night's fire. He let the rope slip free. The sled settled into the snow. Supplies came off one by one, canvas folded neat, stove wrapped in cloth, bedroll, the pot still faint with onion and rabbit. Camp for the night. As he stacked the gear, his mind wandered again, this time to the Subaru. His second car, light as a toy after the old Volare wagon. He and Ryder had taken it through that same corner, with the dip they loved, expecting the usual slide across the lane. Instead the nose lifted, and the whole car went airborne. It came down wrong. The world flipped end over end, 6 times before the ditch caught them. Behind them, 150 feet of skid marks. In front, a smoking heap in a frozen field. They crawled out coughing, cigarettes still burning between their fingers. First thing they did was toss the smokes into the weeds, as if that might save them from their parents. They walked to a buddy's place, called for a tow, and told the cops they'd only been doing 35. Nobody believed them. The story made it into the yearbook anyway. Ryder had just grinned, Sammy as always, and said, "We made it. We always make it." The words hung with him as he unrolled the canvas and struck the first spark for fire. Night came fast, the mountain edge rising black against the sky. Tomorrow would carry him higher, deeper. But for now, camp was set, and the old line. Chapter 5. The cold pulled him awake. Frost clung to the edge of the canvas, his breath hanging in the air as he pushed free of the bedroll. The coals from last night's fire glowed faintly, easy to coax back with a few sticks. Soon the flames were steady, smoke lifting thin into the pale morning. He set a tin cup in the embers, the water warming quick. The smell of coffee came sharp and bitter when he poured the grounds, steam curling against the chill. He sat close, hands wrapped around the metal, drinking slow, letting the heat work into his bones. Breakfast was nothing more than jerky and a hard biscuit, eaten while the fire burned down. When the cup was empty, he scattered the coals, packed the blanket tight, and lashed the gear to the sled. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, camp was gone, the ground bare, as if he'd never been there. With the rope across his shoulder, he leaned into the pull, boots crunching in rhythm. Another long day ahead. If the trail held, home waited tomorrow. He'd been walking less than an hour when the light caught him wrong. The forest here was old, thick-timbered, the kind that held daylight to narrow shafts and shadows, deep as night. But up ahead, the trees glared bright, light pouring through as if the whole canopy had been cut away. Harlan slowed, frowning. He knew this stretch as well as his own hands. There wasn't supposed to be an opening here. Not now, not ever. He shifted the rope higher on his shoulder and moved forward carefully, the sled groaning along the track. The closer he came, the stranger it looked. Trees leaned at broken angles. Roots jutted into the sky. Whole trunks were twisted sideways, earth still clinging to them. Then he saw it. An avalanche. Not some small spring slide, but a catastrophic sweep that had gutted the mountain. Snow lay heaped in a wall taller than a man, stretching across the slope. Impossible to climb. Above it, the chute carved straight down from the ridge, a raw scar where the forest had been stripped clean. He pulled the sled closer and braced against a tilted trunk, scanning the length of the damage. The scale of it hit hard. The avalanche had carved a wound straight through the mountain, a mile-wide slash that clear-cut everything in its path. Where heavy timber had stood for generations, nothing remained but wreckage and ice. His trail, the one he had trusted for 13 years, was gone. Not hidden under snow. Not waiting for thaw. Gone. Harlan stood in silence, breath clouding the air, weighing the ruin against the weight of the rope across his shoulder. Camp was on the far side, but the way he had always known had been erased. Two choices pressed at him. He could go up, climb toward the crown where the slide had torn free, cross over at the top, then fight his way down. But that would mean cold hours on the ridge, no cover, nowhere to sleep but in the open. Or he could swing north, follow the edge of the chute, stay with the trees until he found where the bank thinned enough to cross. It would take him off familiar ground, into miles he'd never walked, but the forest at least gave shelter and wood enough to last the night. He looked up once more at the scar carved into the mountain, then shook his head. No sense in climbing. The trees had always been his alley. Fire, cover, warmth. A man could live in the forest. He couldn't live on ice. North it was. Harlan set his jaw, tightened the rope across his shoulder, and leaned into the sled. The runners groaned, biting into fresh snow as he turned along the jagged edge of the slide. The way he'd always known was gone. Now he would have to cut a new one. The going was brutal. For miles the land was torn open, trees thrown in every direction. Roots jutted into the air like broken ribs, clods of earth hanging from them, frozen mid-upheaval. Whole stands of timber lay flat, trunks stacked on trunks, splintered sharp where the avalanche had snapped them clean. Harlan picked his way along the edge, weaving through the ruin. Each step showed him something new, something wrong. Stone boulders rolled far from where they belonged. Snowbanks shaped into impossible mounds. The ground itself buckled and bent. This wasn't the forest he'd known for 13 years. That map was gone. The trail, the landmarks, the rhythm of familiar turns, all erased in one sweep of mountain and snow. More than once he stopped, resting against the sled's rail, staring out at the scar. It ran on, wide as a valley, straight down from the ridge. No thaw would ever put this right. The mountain had been remade, and everything about this place was changed forever. He tightened the rope and pressed on, angling the sled into the slope, forcing his way upward through churned snow and debris. The ridgeline looked wrong from here, skewed, but he figured it was the same peak he'd always walked beneath, just from a new angle. Halfway up the rise, something caught his eye. Two massive boulders, round as millstones, jammed together on a ledge of torn earth. They looked as if they'd been shot through the forest like a pair of pool balls, crashing side by side until they stopped with their flanks pressed close. Snow had piled against them, roots and branches tangled around their bases, but the stone itself gleamed raw where bark and soil had been scraped away in the fall. Harlan stopped, rope slack in his hand, staring at them. He'd never seen them before. The slide had brought them down from somewhere higher, carved them loose and hurled them through the timber until they came to rest here, locked together like giants at play. He drew a slow breath, scanning the slope above, the wreckage below. Even the bones of the mountain had been moved. Then the ground gave way. One heartbeat he was upright. The next he was weightless, sled, snow, and earth all breaking loose beneath his boots. The world dropped out from under him, and he was falling. 60, 70 feet down, through a throat of snow and shattered timber, sticks snapping and roots clawing at his coat. The roar of it filled his ears until the crash came. Hard, violent, the impact hammering the breath from his lungs. He lay there in the drift, vision swimming, chest heaving against air that wouldn't come. For a long moment, there was nothing but the red haze at the edge of sight, his body panicking, trying to remember how to breathe. Then, slow, a ragged pull of air. Another. His lungs unlocked at last, each gasp sharp with pain, each breath raw but real. He rolled to his side, snow packed into his collar, sticks jabbing through the fabric, and pushed himself up on one elbow. His chest burned, but the world steadied around him. The cavern was deep but narrow, its walls steep, the hole he had fallen from a pale circle high above. Snow and branches still sifted down in lazy spirals, vanishing into the shadows. Harlan sat there, breath ragged, panic pressing at the edge of thought. His shoulders screamed from the impact, ribs aching with every draw of air, the pack on his back digging like a stone into bruised flesh. With a grunt he shrugged it off, letting it fall beside him in the snow. He dragged it into his lap, fingers fumbling at the straps. The canvas was scuffed, wet from the fall, but intact. Inside were the bare essentials: knife, fire starter, tin cup, scraps of food, and the rope. Nearly 100 feet of heavy line coiled tight, the grappling hook lashed alongside. It was something. Maybe the only thing that could matter now. He leaned back against the wall, eyes closing for a moment. No one was coming. Nobody even knew where he was. Solitude had always been his choice, his strength. But here, pressed into a hole with no way out but up, it settled on him like a weight. His lungs burned. His chest hurt. Every muscle in his body ached from the fall. He wasn't ready to climb. Not yet. He pulled the pack close, the coiled rope resting against his thigh, and let his head fall back against the stone. The drip of melting water tapped steady somewhere in the dark. His breaths matched it, slower now, until the edge of panic dulled. Maybe a short rest. Let his body come back. He closed his eyes. Just a little nap. Then he'd climb. Chapter 6. Cold woke him again. The drip of water was steady somewhere in the dark, each drop echoing off stone. His breath hung white, ribs stabbing with every pull of air. He shifted against the wall, stiff and bruised, the ache of the fall settled deep in his bones. The cavern was narrow, no more than 5 feet across at the throat above, widening just enough at the base to hold him and the scattered debris that had fallen with him. Snow still sifted down from the hole, catching the weak daylight that spilled through in a pale shaft. The rest was shadow and ice. Harlan pulled his pack into his lap. The canvas was scuffed but intact. Knife, fire starter, tin cup, scraps of food, and the rope. Nearly 100 feet of heavy line coiled tight, the grappling hook lashed alongside. It wasn't much, but it was something. He tilted his head back, squinting toward the hole he'd come through. There it was, his sled. Still at the top, wedged near the lip, half-tipped but holding. He stared a long moment, breath shallow, a plan forming through the fog of pain. If he could throw the hook right, maybe it would catch the sled's frame or lashings. If it held, the weight might anchor him enough to climb back toward the light. If it didn't, maybe the sled would tumble in. Either way, he wouldn't lose. More gear meant more chance. He unlashed the hook and fed out the rope, coils pooling at his feet. The iron was cold in his hands, heavy, awkward. Bracing against the wall, he started swinging the hook in a tight vertical circle beside him, the arc like a wheel, rolling fast at his side. With a grunt, he snapped it upward. Rope jerked against his palms. The hook shot high, struck stone just shy of the sled, and came rattling back down, sparking against the wall before landing hard at his boots. He hauled the rope in, chest heaving. Again. The wheel of iron spun beside him, faster this time, shoulders screaming at the strain. He let it go and watched it sail. Close, close. But not enough. It bounced off the lip and tumbled back, slamming against the cavern wall, the crash echoing long into the dark. He dragged it in again, breath ragged, fingers raw. One more. The hook spun in a blur before he flung it upward. This time it struck true. The teeth smacked hard against the sled's front rail with a hollow crack. For a split second he thought it might hold. Then the sound changed. Wood groaned. Snow crumbled. The sled shifted, the whole weight of it breaking loose from where it had been caught. In an instant it lurched forward, scraped the lip, and slid out of sight. Rope went slack in his hands as he watched the only steady piece of his world vanish. The noise carried down the chute, rails grinding, canvas flapping, then nothing. Silence, except for the faint hiss of snow settling where the sled had been. Harlan stood frozen, rope limp at his feet. The pack was only a fraction of what he owned. The sled had held everything else: food, stove, pelts, even the bedroll. Gone now, swallowed by the mountain. The drip of water ticked in the silence, steady as a clock. He shook his head slowly, disbelief pressing down harder than the cold. With a deep sigh, he coiled the rope again, fingers stiff against the frozen line. The sled was gone. No use mourning it. All he had left was the hook, the rope, and the chance that something above might still hold. He steadied himself, braced his back against the wall, and began swinging the hook once more in that tight vertical arc beside him. The iron whistled through the air, faster, harder, the strain burning his shoulder. When the rhythm felt right, he snapped it upward, rope hissing through his hands as the hook shot into the pale light. It cleared the lip this time, vanishing out of sight. For a long moment, he held his breath, waiting for the telltale clatter of steel on stone. Instead, the rope went taut with a sharp jolt. Something outside had caught. Harlan leaned back against the wall, breathing hard, letting the weight of hope settle through him. He tugged once, twice, and the line held fast, solid enough to climb. Above the cavern, just beyond the circle of light, the truth lay hidden. The hook had not found timber or root. Its teeth had wedged deep in the narrow seam between two massive boulders, the same stones the avalanche had hurled down the slope and left locked together. For now the rock held, but snow melt hissed between them, loosening what had never been steady. Harlan couldn't see it. He only knew the rope was tight in his hands, and for the first time since the fall, escape felt possible. He gave the line a sharp test. It held. He leaned harder, putting more weight into it, boots braced against the cavern floor. The line stayed tight. Solid. He wiped his raw palms on his coat, looped the rope once around his wrist, and set his boots against the wall. Hand over hand, he pulled himself upward, ribs stabbing with every stretch, the cold rope burning grooves into his skin. Slowly, steadily, he rose toward the faint circle of light. Halfway to the top, he paused, chest heaving, forehead pressed against the stone. Another tug. Another reach. The rope shivered under him. Outside, unseen, the boulders shifted. His weight worked them loose, the wedge that held the hook grinding open. Snowmelt hissed through the crack as the stones began to roll. The line went slack. Harlan had time for one sharp gasp before the rope tore free, snatched clean from his hands. He dropped, slamming back into the cavern floor with a bone-jarring crash that knocked the air from his lungs. Pain exploded across his ribs, stars flaring behind his eyes. Above, the movement triggered more than stone. Heavy packed snow, locked tight until now, broke loose with the shifting ground. It poured through the hole in a sudden torrent, a white curtain spilling down into the cavern. For a moment it was a blizzard, the air choked with powder, vision swallowed in a blind whiteout. When it settled, a drift nearly 4 feet deep lay heaped in the corner, glittering faintly in the thin light. Loose flakes still sifted through the air, cold dust settling on his face and clothes as he lay gasping on the ice. The rope was gone, dragged out of reach with the boulders, vanished into the silence beyond. He stared up at the pale circle of sky, chest rising in broken gasps. His hands throbbed, ribs screamed, and the cavern seemed darker now, the light fading with the sun. All he could think of were the years before, the war, the guilt he'd carried, the long solitude on the mountain, and how it all came to this. Not in fire, not in open air, just a hole in the ground, stone closing in, the mountain swallowing him whole. He closed his eyes, let the thought settle, then forced them open again. A glimmer in the corner caught his eye. The heap of snow. 4 feet deep, maybe more. Packed hard but not solid ice. A tunnel. If he couldn't climb, he could dig. Snow held warmth, and warmth meant life. He rolled onto his side with a groan and dragged himself inch by inch toward the pile. Each crawl left streaks of blood on the ice from his torn hands. His ribs burned with every shove, but he kept moving until he reached the drift. He dug with raw fingers, cooping, clawing, carving a hollow into the heart of the pile. The snow resisted at first, then gave, flakes spilling over his wrists. He worked until he had a low, cramped cavity, barely big enough to slide into but out of the open air. With the last of his strength, he pushed himself inside. The walls pressed close and cold, but already the air felt different, muted, still, holding just enough heat to blunt the bite of the cavern. His hands shook, his breath rattled, but the effort was done. He let his head fall back against the snow, darkness edging in around his vision. And there, buried in the hollow, he had Chapter 7, The Flashback. Helmand Province, Afghanistan 2011. At the entry control point of the patrol base, pre-combat checks and inspections are completed before stepping out on the recon patrol to get a closer look at the nearby village. The early morning chill lingered before the heat of the day started to set in. The Marines under my charge are squared away and ready to go. Esti Tmets. My assistant patrol leader gives the thumbs up, and we step off out of the wire. As we near the objective, the sun climbs higher and higher in the sky, adding another obstacle in the form of blazing heat. But no matter. This is just another day at the office. Corporal Jeffries is the point man and gives the halt signal. The village is in sight. It's a normal Afghan village, cooking fires giving off smoke from the huts, kids playing soccer in the dirt and sand, livestock, and animals being tended to by shepherds. Sergeant Metz is next to me and points out a narrow footpath heading north out of the village, and what looks to be 4 adult males hurriedly walking up over the small hill. We lose visual. Metz and I look at each other knowing that didn't look right. The patrol moves around the village just beyond the narrow path and proceeds to follow the men that just crested the hill. Slowly and deathly quiet we get closer to the apex. Jeffries gets low in order to not silhouette himself against the clear blue sky at the top of the hill. He quickly shoots his fist in the air. Everyone freezes. For what felt like an eternity, the entire patrol stands frozen. Then his arm comes out to the side and lowers, telling the rest of us to get down. I tell Metz to hold where he is, making my way to Jeffries, whispers in the rear to hold. Stay low and stay quiet. I get to the front on Jeffries' left shoulder to see what was going on and what he saw. Voices in Arabic started to get clearer. The 4 men, as well as what looked like 20 other men on the other side of this crest, were gathered near pickup trucks with mounted shees. The realization set in that this was a training camp for insurgents, and they used the village to hide their activities. While in disbelief about what we just stumbled across, a little boy on a higher adjacent hill gives the alarm. His cries of "Americans! Americans!" alerts all of the men on the other side of the hill. Almost immediately, rounds snap overhead and kick up dust right in front of Jeffries. And I, taking cover behind the crest, I tell Jeffries to bound back as I cover. It seemed like time slowed down. As I picked up the sights of my rifle and fired, I saw one of the men go down before I heard Jeffries yell, "Set!" my indicator. He was now covering me so I could move. Time remained slowed in me with it, like in dreams, when you are being chased and you can't move fast enough. But fear wasn't at the forefront. There was too much adrenaline to acknowledge fear at the moment. By this point, the rest of the patrol was already covering and moving back the way we came, and the machine gun fire started the stampede of women, children, and elders in the village. "Get to cover in the village," I yelled. This was a risky move because it wasn't cleared and the people still there could easily start shooting too. But we were on foot and the enemy were in trucks, with heavy machine guns coming at us downhill. Cover of the buildings was the only shot we had. Metz and the rest of the patrol make it to a building and set in the M240 when the first truck makes it over the hill. Jackson, the 240 gunner, lets off a burst that would make Chesty proud, taking out the driver and the truck. The next truck comes over. Jackson isn't as lucky this time. The heavy machine gun on the back breathes fire. Rounds splash all around the building, kicking up sand and dust. Jackson and 2 others go down. Without the 240 returning fire, it would be over all too soon. I jump on it and let the truck barreling down on us have it. The gunner goes down, but the truck is still coming. Back blast area clear, rocket. An ear-shattering crack rings out. The AT-4 round splashes into the ground under the truck, launching it in the air, almost eclipsing the sun. 2 technicals down. By this time 2 more are moving around to the west. Metz, hold here and cover that avenue. Snatching the 240 up to move and engage the 2 truck trying to flank. Sprinting to the new firing position. Jeffries in tow with the spare barrel and extra ammo were ready for this fight. Adrenaline still flooding my system. This 27-pound machine gun and the rest of my 50 to 60 pounds of kit felt like nothing as we made it to the new position and dug in. Dismounted men were also firing at us, rounds cracking all around us, forcing us to bring our heads down for a moment. That's all the 50 caliber nightmare on the back of the truck needed to start chipping away at the cover between us and certain death at 600 rounds a minute. Throwing caution to the wind, rising up to return fire, I held the trigger down on that 240, hoping it forced their heads down too, in order to change the barrel and top off on ammo, but that was wishful thinking. Locked in a heated exchange, no one noticed the mother and 2 children running directly into the fray. Fire from both sides continued to ring out, the low rhythmic thuds from the Dash-K, and the rapid high-pitch popping of the 7.62 from the 240. I focus in on the sights, place them center mass on that son of a bitch behind that death machine, and hold down the trigger, cutting him in half. Still holding down the trigger to make sure the technical is out of the fight, something runs into the sight picture, unsure of what it is for a fraction of a second until the realization hits, it's a hijab. By the time this information is processed and the trigger is released, it's too late, and there is no mistaking what happened. I freeze, trying to process what just went down, finally looking up from the sights and seeing what I just did. It hits me like a freight train. Pano! I slammed awake into the narrow ceiling, hard. The packed snow and ice cracked, then gave. A sheet of frozen weight dropped over me, driving me back into white and pressure. Snow filled my mouth and nose. The scream died strangled. I clawed upward, arms shaking, until my hands punched through into light. I dragged myself out and rolled onto my back, gasping, cold air burning my lungs. The sky was a dull, blinding gray, daylight smothered by weather. I sat up, coughing clumps of snow, blood on my lip. Every breath stung. Every muscle screamed. The sobs hit before I could stop them, raw, pulled straight from the chest. I caught myself mid-breath, furious. No. I drove a fist into the snow, teeth grinding until my jaw hurt. I forced the sound back down, swallowing it, shaking with the effort. Cold bit my face. Pain flared along my ribs. I stayed like that, bent, shivering, fists buried, choking down everything trying to break free. Then I heard it, faint under the hiss of wind. A low, rhythmic thump. The forever music of a Huey. I froze, head tilted, breath caught. It couldn't be. Not here. Not now. The sound grew. Steady. Familiar. Pulling something deep in my chest that was half fear, half hope. Ryder. It had to be Ryder. But how would he even know? What was he doing out here in this weather? This high. I pushed to my knees, snow sliding from my shoulders, eyes searching the blank gray for a glimpse of rotors, any shape at all. The thump passed overhead, echoed off the cliffs, close enough to feel in my ribs, then faded, fading, gone. Silence again. Just the wind, the cold, and the weight I could not put down. Chapter 8. Ryder. The cool breeze blew across the tarmac, pushing the distinct smell of jet fuel along with it. Click. Dot. The ignition switch snapped into place. Outside, the frigid Montana air was still, until the faint electric whir of a turbine winding up broke the silence, like a distant jet spooling in reverse. Inside the cockpit, boots braced on worn floor panels. Ryder flicked the AC power to phase. Dials stirred to life in the glow of green backlighting. The low RPM warning horn pierced the air. Sharp, insistent. His hand silenced it without even glancing. Thump. Bion. The fuel pump kicked on, followed by the hum of hydraulics vibrating through the airframe. He pressed the master caution test button, clack, and reset it with a practiced jab of the thumb. Outside, a rhythmic snap, snap, snap joined the turbine whine, the igniters waking the beast. The sound was unmistakable. The Huey was about to breathe fire. Transition to engine start. Throttle twisted open, then back to start. He pressed the starter. Firm, deliberate. The turbine roared louder now, climbing past 30. 35. 40% none. Above, the heavy blades began to stir with a ghostly whoop. Whop. Wah. The aircraft shivered as the rotors caught momentum, that deep slapping echo bouncing off the nearby hills. He released the starter. The sound tightened as the turbine settled into rhythm. Final checks. Avionics. Online. Inverter. Main on. Transmission oil. Green bunch. Fire indicators. Clear. Tune. He eased the throttle forward, bringing the rotors to full song. The Huey now screamed with purpose. Old warbird music, guttural and alive. Outside, snow at his feet scattered in spinning vortices. Pine branches thrashed in the rotor wash. He keyed the mic, voice calm and steady. Twin Bridges Tower. Ghost 1 ready for departure, northbound to Ennis. See you next week. Static hissed, then a faint reply crackled back. Ghost 1, you're cleared. Have a good flight. He smiled. Roger that. He flipped the radio switch to music. Thunk, 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 thunk. A slow heartbeat of drums echoed like footsteps in a dark hall. Then the sitar slithered in. Ring, ring, rang, rang, rang. Metallic and hypnotic, twisting through the air like smoke. A sharp snap of snare. Cut through, steady as a march. The bass rolled under it. Doom, 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 doom. The guitar slid next, dry, jangly, chickatang-tang, chasing the sitar's ghostly melody. The rhythm locked tight. Thump, 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 cha. Thump. Ryder grinned and sang along, low and rough, carried by the pulse of the rotors. I see a red door, and I want it painted black. Outside, the Huey surged upward, slicing through the cold air as if it had waited decades for this flight. Sunlight flashed off its worn olive skin. Rotor wash kicked glittering snow into the sky. Ryder was alive up there, alive in a way only he could be. Laughing, shouting into the wind, the old warbird thundering beneath him as if sharing the joy. He banked north toward the mountains, free, fearless and home. High above, the valley spread beneath him like a patchwork quilt of forests, river curves, and open fields. The Jefferson River traced a silver ribbon through the flats, catching morning light as it wound between ridges and braided into shallows below. To the east and west, foothills rose in slow steps, forested slopes climbing into darker green, dotted with rock outcrops. Beyond them, sharper peaks loomed, their crests jagged and shadowed, snow clinging in hollows where winter still held on. Sunlight glinted off every white scar as the mountains drew nearer. Below, pockets of farmland and roads etched fine lines through the trees. Ranch houses, barns, clearings. They looked like toys in the vastness. The Huey skimmed the ridgeline, blades cutting the morning stillness. The valley widened and narrowed as he followed the river north, the peaks ahead growing higher, etched against flawless blue. Off to the left, something odd caught his eye. At first it was just color, a pale stripe cutting through the evergreens where dark timber should have been. The pattern looked wrong, uneven. He eased the cyclic banking just enough to bring it into view. The mountainside had been ripped wide open. A path of snow and debris tore straight down the slope, half a mile across. Trees lay flattened in tangled rows, the forest peeled back like bark stripped from a log. Holy hell, he muttered. He reached forward and tapped the small GoPro mounted on the dash. The red light blinked to life. All right, let's get this on tape, he said under his breath. The camera caught the devastation as he guided the Huey along the edge of the slide, keeping a safe, steady distance. The rotors thumped slow and even, the air calm but watchful. He wasn't about to play stunt pilot out here. He angled slightly to follow the chute downward, the lens capturing every torn stump and scar as the forest gave way to wreckage and ice. From up here the scale was staggering, nature's raw power written in white and brown. Ryder gave a low whistle. Ennis folks are gonna wanna see this. He kept the camera rolling another minute, sweeping slow across the valley, then clicked it off and leveled the nose north. The Huey climbed gently, the slide fading behind. The world ahead, calm again. He was just about to bank toward Ennis when something glinted through the glass by the foot pedals. A shape. Small. Out of place. He frowned, leaning forward past the reflection. The sunlight hit it just right. A faint metallic flash, half buried near the edge of the debris field. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. Instinct pulled his hand to the collective. He eased the Huey into a slow descent, keeping the angle wide and airspeed steady. The bird responded smooth and obedient, dipping toward the scarred slope. He wasn't about to push his luck this close to broken terrain, but the thing down there, it didn't fit. Not in this wilderness. As the ground drew nearer, details sharpened. Snow, splintered timber, and something else, edges too straight to be natural. Ryder's gut tightened. Whatever it was, it didn't belong here. He circled once, careful and deliberate, eyes fixed on the spot below. As he descended, the picture came clear. The shape wasn't random. It had form and purpose. Wood, lashed with rawhide, darkened from years of weather. A sled. He leaned closer, squinting. Not just any sled. He knew that build, the curved nose, hand-carved crossbeams, the patch on the left runner. He'd seen it 100 times. Harlan's sled. Ryder frowned, questions racing faster than his pulse. What the hell's it doing here? He eased the Huey lower, just enough to see without kicking up snow. The sled sat half buried at the slide's edge, one rail cracked, supplies scattered and frozen in place. "Why'd you leave it, Harlan?" he muttered. "You don't just walk away from your rig." He hovered a moment longer, scanning for movement, tracks, anything. Nothing but churned snow and splintered timber. The wind buffeted lightly against the frame, the mountains silent beneath him. The emptiness pressed in, the kind that made a man's gut go cold. Ryder swallowed hard, eyes locked on that broken sled. Something about it felt wrong. He wasn't sure what yet, but he knew he had to find out. Ryder eased the collective, pulling the Huey into a slow climb along the slope. The mountain tilted beneath him, the wreckage of trees giving way to drifts and broken stone. He kept his distance, watching the terrain unfold through the glass. Up ahead, two massive boulders jutted from the slope, round, gray, half buried in snow. They sat close together, like twin sentinels rolled down from the heights and frozen in place. Ryder's brows knit. "Tantiwo." "Well, that's new." Then he saw it. A long black line cut straight down slope from between the rocks, thin at the top, widening as it stretched nearly 200 feet through the white. It wasn't a shadow. It was too solid, too stark against the snow. "What in the—" He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The line looked burned in, a rope of darkness tracing through the slide path. He dropped the Huey a few yards, cautious but intent, rotor wash stirring faint ghosts of powder. The dash camera caught it all. The boulders, the scar between them, and that strange black trail leading down into nothing. A knot of dread twisted in his gut. Whatever happened here, it wasn't just an avalanche. He hovered steady, staring through the glass. The line didn't lie. It led from the rocks straight down toward where Harlan's sled had been torn apart. He climbed higher, tracing the rope's dark path upslope. The line cut through the snow like ink on paper, leading straight toward the twin boulders. Then something else came into view. Beyond them, the white gave way to a patch of darkness, an irregular shape, wide and jagged, like a football pressed into the mountainside. The edges were sharp, snow drooping where the ground had collapsed inward. Ryder's stomach clenched. It wasn't shadow. It was a hole, deep, Being shy. He brought the Huey around in a slow, cautious arc, nose tipping as he peered down through the glass. The rope led right to it, dead on. The line didn't end there. It disappeared into the black. Ryder exhaled, a thin fog against the cockpit glass. Jesus, Harlan, what the hell happened here? He steadied the bird against a crosswind, hovering in place, eyes locked on that dark wound in the snow. Every instinct told him not to get closer, but every part of him needed to know. Ryder banked gently, trying to circle for a better view. The Huey tilted into a slow arc, blades chopping steady against the thin mountain air. He kept one hand light on the cyclic, eyes glued to the dark shape below. But every angle was the same. Too steep, too narrow, too unstable. The wind curled off the ridge in unpredictable bursts, tossing the bird just enough to warn him off. He shook his head, jaw tight. No way. There's nowhere to put her down. He made one last slow pass, leaning to catch any detail inside that black hole, but the shadows swallowed everything. The rope vanished into it like a lifeline cut short. Ryder pulled back on the cyclic, climbing hard until the slope fell away beneath him. His heart hammered now, breath shallow in the headset. Harlan, buddy, what did you get yourself into? The mountain loomed silent below. That broken sled and the yawning hole burned into his mind. He didn't need proof. His gut already knew. Something had gone bad. He keyed the mic, voice low and steady, but edged with panic. Coast 1 to Ennis. Possible emergency on the mountain, northeast of Hollowtop. I've got signs of a slide and equipment belonging to Harlan Slade. He's missing. I'm heading your way. Static crackled, then a faint reply. Copy that, Ghost 1. We'll notify dispatch and get a rescue team standing by. Bring her in safe. Ryder tightened his grip on the cyclic. Roger that. Keep 'em warm. We're gonna need every hand we've got. He turned south toward Ennis, the Huey pushing against the cold air, engines rising to a steady growl. Behind him, the mountain stood silent, its secret buried deep in the snow. Chapter 9. The Rescue Party. The world was quiet again. Only the faint hiss of melting snow and the slow drip of water broke it. Harlan pushed himself upright, every joint stiff, ribs burning with each breath. The echo of the Huey still clung to the stone, like thunder trapped in his chest, but now it was gone, leaving nothing but his own breath. He took stock. The cavern wasn't wide, maybe 10 feet. But deep enough that the pale ring of light above looked miles away. Snow crusted the floor in uneven ridges, packed hard where he'd fallen through. The air hung heavy, damp with the last of the storm. He dragged himself along the wall, palm braced against the cold stone. It was slick in places where ice had formed. At the far end, half buried in drift, something rough caught his hand. He scraped away the crust and found wood, thin, splintered lengths, the remains of roots and broken limbs torn loose when the avalanche first came down. It wasn't much, but it was something. He gathered what he could, maybe an armful, and carried it to the center of the floor. From the pack he pulled the tin of emergency gear, flint, steel, and a small bundle of dry tinder sealed years ago, just in case. The first strike sparked weakly. The second caught. Tiny threads of smoke curled through the cold. He bent close, coaxing the ember until it licked the shavings and began to grow. A faint warmth touched his face. The fire cracked once, throwing dim orange across the walls. It wasn't enough to heat the space, not really, but it was enough to remind him he still existed. He leaned back, staring into the fragile flame. The cavern flickered around him. Stone, ice, dripping water, and the faint shadow of his own outline. He let out a long breath, steady, almost calm. The heat soaked into his fingers, thawing the ache from his hands. For the first time since the fall, he wasn't shivering. He flexed his fingers near the flame and watched the skin glow red in the light. The sound of the Huey still lived in his chest. He could feel it more than remember it, the deep thump that shook the walls, the rhythm no man could mistake. Ryder, Dort, I. No question. Had he seen something? Maybe. Or maybe he'd just been flying his route, curious about the avalanche. There was no reason to think otherwise. Still, that sound lingered long enough to make a man wonder. Harlan rubbed his face with both hands, jaw tight. "You were close," he muttered to the dark. "Close enough." He eyed the pack beside him. A few strips of jerky. A swallow or two of water. That was it. Rope gone. No clear handholds above. His body felt like lead, and the thought of climbing again turned his stomach. He scooped a tin cup of snow, held it near the flame, and watched it melt down to a swallow. Steam fogged the rim. He drank slow, the cold biting his teeth. The light above had dimmed. Still there, but faint. Dusk, maybe. Hard to tell. He stared at the fire. Thought about trying again. About the wall. About how easy it would be to fall wrong, to end it fast. Then he thought about Ryder, the Huey banking slow above the avalanche. Maybe searching, maybe not. He leaned his head back against the stone. "Give him time," he whispered. "Give him a damn chance." He fed the fire another stick and watched the flames climb higher, the warmth painting his face in dull gold. The ache in his ribs dulled to something he could live with. His eyes drifted, the crackle of fire blending with the drip of water. For now, he'd rest, regain what little strength he had left. Whatever came next, Ryder, rescue, or the mountain, it could wait until morning. By the time Ryder brought the Huey down, the sun was already gone. The landing zone outside Ennis glowed under the hangar lights, a thin skin of snow swirling off the tarmac. The rotors wound down slow, that deep hump fading to a steady hum. He climbed out stiff and cold, camera still clipped to the dash. 2 men waited near the truck. Local search and rescue, both pulled straight from dinner when he called it in. "Got something you need to see," Ryder said, voice low and tight. He thumbed the camera on and handed it over. The small screen flickered, showing the slide from above, the scarred white chute, the broken sled, and that black line leading straight into the mountain. "Jesus," one of them muttered. "That's his sled." "Yeah," Ryder said. "And that hole, if he's alive, he's down there." The 3 men stood silent for a moment, wind howling through the open bay. Then Ryder pulled a topo map from his jacket and flattened it on the truck hood. "It's about 24 miles out," he said, tracing the route with a gloved finger. "We can ride halfway by sled before the slope gets bad. After that, we walk. If we move before first light, we'll be there by nightfall." The older rescuer, Dan Mercer, head of local SAR, nodded. "We'll pack light. Snowshoes, rope, heat blankets. No way to take machines through that upper ridge." Ryder's gaze lifted toward the dark mountains. "Then let's move. He's up there somewhere, and the clock's already running." They packed fast, gear stowed, fuel topped, the night closing in. Within the hour, engines cracked the silence north of Ennis, 3 snowmobiles carving through the drifted flats toward the high country. By the time Ryder and the others cleared town, the night had gone sharp and still. Their machines growled through drifts that reached the fenders, headlights cutting narrow tunnels of light up the mountain road. Behind him rode Dan Mercer and a younger hand named Cole Ramsey, quiet, strong, and too new to know how bad these nights could get. The lower valley was easy enough. Higher up, the trail turned rough. Fallen limbs, half-buried boulders, the uneven crust along the avalanche's edge. Every half-mile they had to stop, scout a new route, then press forward again. By midnight, the ridgelines had closed around them, black silhouettes against a starlit sky. The snowmobiles could go no farther. The rest would be on foot. Ryder cut his engine. The mountain fell silent but for the wind. "We walk from here," he said. Dan nodded, tightening his straps. Cole glanced up at the dark slope ahead, where the avalanche path glimmered faintly in the starlight. No one said anything more. They started climbing. They climbed for hours, snow grinding underfoot, the slope steepening with every mile. The air turned thin, the cold biting through layers until even breath felt like glass. Ryder led, boots punching through the crust, the rope lines stretching back to Dan and Cole. The avalanche path was a maze, broken trunks, ridges of ice, slabs of snow frozen mid-collapse. Each step sank deep, and every few yards they had to haul each other over another drift, or skirt the rim of a buried crevice. When they finally stopped, Ryder dropped his pack and pulled the topo map from his jacket. He spread it across a knee, the beam from his headlamp catching the inked ridge lines. "We're here," he said, tapping a gloved finger near the lower chute. "Harlan's cabin's still another 10 miles north, but the slide sits right about here. 7, maybe 8 hours on foot, if the weather holds." Dan exhaled through his scarf. "If it holds." Ryder folded the map, eyes scanning the slope above. The wind had picked up again, thin, keening, dragging snow in ghostly lines across the surface. "We keep moving," he said. "We stop, we freeze." No one argued. They pulled their packs on and pushed forward, headlamps bobbing in the dark as the mountain swallowed them whole. Chapter 10. The Decision. When he woke, the fire was down to a dull glow. No flame, just the faint red pulse of dying coals. Smoke drifted low across the floor, too weak to rise. The cold had already taken back most of the room. He sat there a long time, staring at what was left of the warmth, the air thick with ash and damp. While the fire had burned, the walls had seemed alive, light rippling across the stone like water, ice glowing soft where it caught the heat. He'd seen shapes in it then, ridges and hollows that almost looked like faces, or mountains, or a home. When the flames died, they went with them. Now the walls were just black stone again, slick in places where melt had refrozen, rough where the rock had split. He studied them slowly, eyes tracing every seam and crack. The shaft above had to be 60, maybe 80 feet, near vertical. Not smooth, but close. Still, there were holes. Not many. Just enough to make a man wonder. He flexed his fingers. The skin was split across the knuckles, raw and swollen, but they could still close. His ribs ached when he breathed. His leg was stiff. The cold gnawed at everything. But he was alive. He followed one possible line upward with his eyes, an uneven stitch of ridges and cracks, narrow ledges no wider than a hand. A free climb. No rope. No safety. If he slipped, the floor would meet him with stone or ice. That would be the end of it. He let out a slow breath and pressed his head back against the wall. It wasn't a plan. It was a chance. Thin, dangerous, his alone. If luck had anything left for him, it would have to be found on that wall. The thought hung there, empty as the cold. Then something else rose under it. Quiet at first, then sharper. Not hope. Not even belief. Anger. A stubborn refusal. Not sitting. Not waiting. Not like this. He worked his jaw until the ache eased. "One more mission," he said to the dark, voice barely there. It wasn't ceremony. It was a switch. Assess. Act. Dut. Survive. He pictured the climb in pieces, not as a whole. 5 moves to the first seam, 3 to a shelf, a rest, then another run. He stripped off his stiff gloves and shoved them into his coat. Bare fingers would hold better, even if they bled. He rubbed his hands along the dusty floor, then across a strip of stone blackened with soot, trying to kill the slick. Friction was everything now. He stood, slow, letting the head rush past. The world swayed once, then steadied. He walked to the wall and laid his palm against it. The rock was colder than his hand by a long mile. He closed his eyes, breathed twice, and opened them again. First line, low and right. A shallow groove for 3 fingers, almost nothing else. Above it, a sharp nub for the left. Feet would have to smear, boot rubber pressed to bare stone, trusting friction more than shape. Then a hand-width shelf to settle on. Maybe. Move, he told himself, and moved. Right hand into the groove. Left to the nub. He set his right foot high, toes edged on a wrinkle in the rock. Pressed the left flat, just pressure and faith. He shifted his weight. The wall took him. Muscles woke in his forearms, a hot line under the skin. His ribs barked. He kept moving. 2 breaths, and he was a body length up. Don't look down. He didn't. He kept his eyes locked on stone. Found a seam. Crimped it. Fingertips screamed. He slid his right hand higher, matched with the left, a slow ladder of pain. The first shelf was there, 2 fingers wide but enough. He eased onto it, arms hanging loose, elbows locked, forearms flooding with heat. 30 seconds. That was all he could steal. He counted under his breath. At 20, his hands started to shake. At 30, he reset the world. Next section. The wall swelled outward just enough to force him long. A tiny quartz knob for the right, a shallow dish for the left. The feet were worse. 1 smear, 1 edge. If the right foot popped, he'd pendulum off and rip skin. He set his chest close to the rock, kept his center tight, and reached anyway. The quartz took him. The dish tried to spit him. He bore down and felt the rock answer. Not with mercy, but with physics that would hold if he did. He moved his left foot higher, toes cramping inside the boot. Exhaled slow through his teeth and shifted again. Halfway through the traverse, the right hand slipped. Not a fall, just raw fingers losing bite. He shut his eyes, found the anger again, and closed harder. Pain made a clean sound in his head, and the hand held. A crack opened above, thin as a blade, running diagonally. He pinched it with the last strength in his thumb and hauled himself up to a shallow dimple, 3 fingers, then a 4th if he twisted. He got his chest to the rock and collapsed into it, cheek to stone, breath loud in his ears. Rest, bite. 10 seconds. Day. 15. He shook one arm at a time, fingers fluttering open and shut to force blood back where it belonged. His hands would give him 3, maybe 4 more burns before they were nothing but meat hanging from bone. 20 seconds. Move. Up and left now, toward a darker seam. He jammed his hand where the ice had pulled free, skin greasing on frozen wet. Wiped once on his jacket and tried again. Better. He torqued his wrist to lock the jam, teeth clenched, and brought his right to a vertical ripple he'd marked from below. Pressed weight into his feet, left on a sliver, right smearing, and stood. A soft crunch somewhere above. He froze. Listened. Snow settling, nothing more. He moved. 2 body lengths. Then the crack died into a blank pane of stone that threw back his reflection in the ice sheen. He shifted right, feeling blind for anything. Roughness, bite. His fingertips found a shallow depression, barely enough to name. He tested it. Pain answered, honest and brutal. He took it and stepped up. The ribs stabbed hard. He stopped until the flare receded, breathing shallow and slow. He thought about how the firelight had once made these same surfaces look kind, like water. There was no kindness here. Just edges. Just choices. Another rest. A diagonal lip that let him lean weight to bone again. His hands dangled, forearms shaking as blood returned. He couldn't feel the skin anymore. He didn't need to. He mapped the next 4 moves. Right to a cracked scale, left to a blunt ridge. Feet high on nothing, heaving into a shallow pocket. Then a mantle over a bulge that would either take or spit him. No second try. Up, he said, and went. Right, guy. Left, Died. Feet high. Cora locked. The pocket held. He breathed once and through the mantle. The palm slid, caught, slid again, caught. His shoulders screamed. He rocked over the bulge with a sound he didn't know he'd made and bellied onto a shelf the size of a book. He lay there, chest to rock, face to cold stone, and laughed once, one dry cough that wasn't humor. The shelf wasn't flat, but enough to curl his fingers and half rest his elbows. He blinked sweat, or melt, out of his eyes, and looked up. He was somewhere near the middle. Maybe higher. The shaft narrowed above, which made the angles worse but the holds better. More breaking and refreezing meant more scars in the face. The good and bad lived in the same inch. His hands were slick with blood. He wiped them on his coat, leaving dark smears. He didn't look down. He didn't need to. Down was the same as stopping. The next sequence was vertical. No traverse to buy time. A ladder of lies. Crystals that looked solid until you tested them, and they powdered under your skin. He tested everything 3 times, and only trusted it after it lied the same way twice. At one reach, his right foot skated. Just a whisper, and his whole body jolted. A flare of pain lit through his ribs. Sparks detonated behind his eyes. He locked back on with fury and hung there until the shaking passed. Not like this, he said, breath fogging the cliff 2 inches from his mouth. Above, a seam widened into something you could call a ledge. Not big, but real. Rest. Dah. He aimed for it. 3 moves. 2, Junde, Pam, Tau. 1. Bidi. He slapped the ledge with fingers that barely obeyed, hooked 2 knuckles, then 3, and dragged himself up until his boots found purchase. He stood shaking, arms hanging loose. The ledge was maybe 3 inches deep. It felt like a porch. He looked up again. The last third steepened. The light was stronger now. Thin air pouring down cold and clean. He could see the rim, still far, but no longer theory. Wind brushed his cheek. The smell of open snow leaked down like a promise too small to trust. His hands pulsed with pain that had lost edges. He flexed them once. They didn't answer right away. He waited until they did. 3 more burns, maybe 4. He closed his eyes. The Huey's thump lived deep in his chest again. Not sound, but rhythm. It didn't matter if it had been chance. It didn't matter if no one ever came back. There was still a wall, and there were still holds, and he was still here to take them. He opened his eyes and set his right hand on the first edge of the last third. Then he climbed. The world above felt close now. The light brighter, the air sharper, almost thin enough to taste. He could see the lip clearly, a thin white edge where snow drifted over stone. He reached up, testing the first hold above. Solid. Dot. His fingers locked, tendons drawn tight. He shifted weight and pulled, boot scraping for purchase. Another reach, higher this time, into the shadow of the rim. The surface changed. Smooth, then slick. Ice instead of stone. He tried again, pressing harder. Fingertips searching for grip that wasn't there. The edge gave with a crack, just a hairline break, but enough. His hand slipped. There was no shout, no cry. Just the sound of his breath leaving him as the wall fell away. He hit once, hard against a ridge, then again, the world spinning white and gray. The last impact came flat and final. His head struck ice with a dull, heavy sound that echoed through the cavern. Silence followed, deep ringing, absolute. Snow sifted down, soft as dust, settling over him where he lay twisted in the blue half-light. Then came a sound. Faint, hollow, from deep beneath him. A pop like a gunshot, then another, sharper. The ice wasn't groaning anymore. It was fracturing. Each crack rolled through the stone like thunder in a bottle, echoing up the shaft until it felt like the mountain itself was breathing. He turned toward it, eyes wide, pulse hammering in time. The floor quivered once, then again, a subtle shift that made the blood pooled beneath him ripple and slide toward the dark edge. He knew that sound. It didn't stop until something gave. "Come on," he rasped, forcing his arms under him. The effort ripped a scream from his ribs. Every muscle burned. He rolled, inch by inch, onto his stomach, biting down until his jaw locked. Pain flared behind his eyes, white hot. He spat blood into the snow and kept pushing, dragging forward, anything to get off that sound. The floor went silent for half a heartbeat, then broke. The ice gave way from mid-chest down, a deafening snap that swallowed his shout. The world dropped out. He fell into open air, the walls flashing past in blurs of blue and black. His boot struck one side, his knee slammed the other. The impact a brutal explosion of pain that tore a scream out raw. The leg jammed tight, wedged between the two walls like a caught branch, and his body snapped down onto it. The crunch was unmistakable. He landed hard, full weight, on the trapped limb. Pain went total, white, searing, animal. It tore through his spine, up his ribs, down to his fingertips. He howled into the dark until his voice cracked, echoes chasing themselves up the shaft. Then came the second sound. Far below, the slab of ice he'd been lying on hit bottom. The crash roared up from the depths, a booming chain of echoes that shook the air. The void answered like a living thing, layer after layer of thunder spiraling upward until the whole cavern hummed. When it faded, there was nothing left but his ragged breathing, and the truth that he was alive, dangling over an endless drop, pinned to the mountain by his own shattered leg. The echoes rolled on long after the ice had hit bottom, fading slow like thunder dragging its claws through the dark. Harlan sat frozen, lungs heaving, every nerve screaming. The pain in his leg was beyond language, bright, savage, alive. Each heartbeat sent another jolt through it, sharp enough to make his vision spark white. He blinked, trying to steady the world. Stone loomed inches from his face on both sides, slick with frost, pressing close enough that his shoulders brushed both walls. He couldn't move, barely breathe. His leg was the anchor, jammed somewhere below, twisted and wedged where the rock walls met. Every twitch sent fire up through his spine. "Jesus Christ!" The words came out as a broken rasp. He forced his eyes downward. Past his pinned leg there was nothing, just black. A void so deep it swallowed sound. The air rising from it was colder than anything he'd ever felt, like standing at the mouth of death itself. He pressed his palms to the walls, trembling, heart slamming against his ribs. 10 feet? Bang. Maybe 12. That's all he'd fallen. But the distance beneath him might as well have been forever. The pain blurred thought. His pulse hammered loud enough to drown everything else, until another sound cut through it. A voice. Faint at first, stretched thin by the distance. Then clearer. "Harlan! Harlan! Are you down there? Hello?" His head snapped upward, dizzy from the motion. The light from the hole far above shimmered faint and distant, a pale ring. But the echo that followed was unmistakable. "Ryder. Torch." For a second, he couldn't breathe. His throat locked, the name caught halfway between disbelief and a sob. He tried to answer, but what came out was a strangled, broken sound. He dragged in another breath, chest shaking. "Ryder." His voice tore on the word, raw and weak. "Ryder, I'm here." The sound bounced off the stone, spiraling upward until it vanished into the height. Then silence again, heavy and still, as if the mountain itself had closed its hand over him. Chapter 11. The Rescue. The wind had died to a low hiss through the pines. Snow shifted and cracked beneath their boots as Ryder and the two men worked along the rim. The crevice swallowed light and sound. Nothing below but cold and shadow. Ryder dropped to one knee, gloves stiff with frost, and drove a piton deep into the rock seam. The hammer strikes echoed like distant gunfire. "That's one," he said quietly. Bill moved beside him, feeding out the line. Jake braced the secondary anchor around a buried pine stump, looping it twice before locking the carabiner shut. "Check it," Ryder said. Jake tugged hard on the rope. "Solid." Ryder clipped in, gave the main line a test pull, then leaned his weight into the harness. The rope creaked, but held. He looked to the others. "Keep it steady. Don't let me swing." They nodded. Ryder turned his lamp on, the beam cutting a narrow cone through the drifting snow, then eased backward over the edge. His boots scraped ice, kicked for grip, then found the first ridge of stone. The rope slid with a soft hiss through his descender. 10 feet down, the temperature dropped sharply. His breath turned to mist inside the visor. He swung slightly, steadied himself with one hand, and spotted the shelf. A narrow ledge jutting from the wall, just wide enough to stand on. He descended the last few feet and landed, boots crunching on frozen grit. He drove another piton into the wall and clipped himself in. "I'm secure," he called up. "Copy." Bill's voice echoed faintly from above. Ryder steadied his breathing and leaned out over the ledge. The beam of his headlamp found the hollow below, glints of ice, a torn pack, the faintest trace of movement. "Harlan!" he shouted, voice carrying down into the dark. A few seconds passed. Then, from far below, came a rough, broken sound. Not quite a word, but alive. Ryder tightened his grip on the rope. "Hang on, brother. I've got you." He crouched low, lamp sweeping the shadows. The light caught torn fabric, a streak of frozen blood, and finally Harlan's face. Pale, eyes half open, lips blue. Harlan was wedged into the wall, 10 feet below. One leg jammed deep in a split of stone, twisted at an angle no joint should take. His hands hung limp at his sides, knuckles raw and dark. "Goddamn Harlan," Ryder muttered. He keyed the radio clip to his shoulder. "I've got eyes. He's about 10 feet under me. Alive, but barely." Bill's voice crackled back. "Can you reach him?" "Not a chance. I'll have to make a sling and get it down to him." Ryder unclipped a coil from his belt, fed it through a carabiner, and looped the rope beneath himself, sitting into it so the tension carried his weight. He tested it twice, swaying an inch each time, until it held. "All right," he breathed. "We're doing this the hard way." He knotted a short length into a crude swing seat, 2 loops cross-lashed in the middle, and clipped it to the main line. "Send me the extra rope," he called up. Jake leaned over the rim, lowering another bundle. The coils brushed Ryder's shoulder. He caught them, tied the new line to the seat, and began feeding it downward, the rough hemp whispering through his gloves. The end touched Harlan's chest. No reaction. Ryder steadied the rope. "Harlan! You gotta wake up, man. Grab the rope." A faint groan echoed from below, more breath than voice. "Come on, Marine," Ryder said louder now. "You've done worse than this. Open your eyes." Harlan's head twitched. One hand stirred, slipped, then caught the line. "That's it," Ryder said, forcing calm. "Wrap it under your arms. You hear me? Under your arms, not your hands." It took long minutes. Harlan fumbled clumsily, half blind, but somehow managed to loop the rope across his chest. "Bill, take the slack," Ryder ordered. The line above tightened. Ryder braced his boots against the ice, hand on the belay. "Slow haul. He's stuck by the leg. This is gonna tear like hell." The rope went taut. Harlan's body shifted, a raw sound bursting from his throat as his leg wrenched free with a sickening pop. "Easy, easy," Ryder shouted, controlling the sway. Harlan dangled now, limp but clear, of the rock. Ryder guided the line in, easing him toward the ledge. When Harlan's boots scraped the ice beside him, Ryder caught his coat and hauled him in close. "I got you," he said, voice rough. You're clear. He held Harlan upright against the wall, both breathing hard, the rope still creaking above. The sound of the mountain returned. Small pops of shifting ice, the whisper of wind. Harlan's body started to convulse as the blood rushed back into his leg. His breath came in short, violent bursts. Easy, Ryder said, gripping his shoulder. Stay with me. You're okay. Harlan's voice came out hoarse, almost a growl. Hurts. Christ. It hurts. I know, Ryder said, lowering him gently. You're out. That's what matters. Don't fight it. Just breathe. Color began to return to Harlan's face, pale skin flushing red as the cold released its hold. The leg below the knee was swelling fast, the boot dark with blood and meltwater. Above, a voice shouted down. What do you need? Ryder keyed his radio. We'll need a stretcher. Use the pine limbs by the sled. Strip 'em and cross-lash with the spare line. Make it solid, not pretty. Copy that. Ryder turned back. Harlan was shaking uncontrollably now. Listen to me, Ryder said. You're not dying here, you hear? You made it this far. Keep breathing. That's your only job. Harlan blinked through tears, jaw locked. Feels like it's on fire. It is, Ryder said quietly. That's the blood waking it up again. Means it's still yours. He pulled a small flask from his jacket, unscrewed it, and pressed it to Harlan's lips. Small sip, don't choke on it. The whiskey hit his throat. He coughed, but color returned to his eyes. Ryder wiped the frost from his beard with a gloved hand and looked up. The silhouettes of his men moved against the snow line, dragging branches together. Almost there, Ryder murmured. They'll lower it down, we'll strap you in and you're going home. Harlan's hand found his sleeve and gripped weakly. You came back. Ryder met his eyes. Of course I did. A few minutes later, Bill's voice carried down. Stretchers ready. We're lowering. Ryder leaned out to guide it in. The makeshift frame, 2 pine limbs lashed with rope and cross-tied with torn canvas, descended slowly through the blue light. He caught it, swung it against the wall, and steadied it on the ledge. Nice work, he shouted. Hold tension on that upper line. He knelt beside Harlan, who was still trembling, sweat freezing on his face. All right, partner. Time to get you off this ledge. Harlan groaned, half laughing, half cursing. You had to fly out when I was in town, huh? Figured I'd drop by, see you for a beer. Ryder smirked faintly. Yeah, bad timing, like always. You picked one hell of a way to visit. Harlan tried to shift but gasped, biting down on the pain. God. Feels like it's on fire. I know, bite it down. Ryder's voice dropped low. Steady. We've got to move you now, or that leg's done for. Just hold still. He worked fast, guiding Harlan's shoulders into position, keeping the broken leg supported while easing him onto the canvas. Every motion dragged a ragged sound from Harlan's throat. Almost there. Just breathe. That's it. Once Harlan was centered, Ryder pulled the side ropes over his chest and tied them off. Then the ankle straps, careful around the swollen boot. He cinched the knots tight, checking each one. Don't make him too tight, Harlan hissed. Can't have you falling out halfway up, Ryder said. You'll thank me later. Doubt it. You will, because you're walking out of here. From above, Jake's voice called. We ready? Ryder tested the rig. He's secure. Start lowering the haul line. The rope hissed through the pulleys again, snow and dust sifting down. Ryder clipped the stretcher's rig into the main line and locked the carabiner. All right, he said quietly. We're getting you home. He tightened the last strap, leaned back on his heels, and let out a shaky breath. Couple months, he said. Didn't think the next time I saw you would be down a hole. Harlan tried to smile but couldn't. Could have come by. I was in town 3 times. You were always off somewhere. Work's been stacked, Ryder said. You know how it goes. Yeah, you and that damn bird. Ryder smirked. Keeps me out of trouble. Didn't keep you out of this. They both managed a weak laugh before the cold took it back. Ryder adjusted the rope and looked him over again. You really thought you could make that trail this late in the season? Didn't think it'd fight back, Harlan muttered, voice trembling. You should have seen it, though. Sky was clear. Whole valley lit up like glass. Ryder nodded slowly. You always did chase the view. Silence settled. Heavy, but not awkward. Then Harlan whispered, Guess I owe you one. Ryder shook his head. You don't owe me a damn thing. We'll talk when we're off this mountain. He gave a final nod, upward. Haul slow. Keep her steady. The ropes tightened, creaked, and began to lift. Harlan groaned through clenched teeth as the stretcher rose an inch, then another. Up. Ryder stayed close, guiding it with his gloved hands, boots scraping ice to keep the frame from swinging. Easy, he called. Nice and slow. Above, the lines hissed through pulleys. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals, glowing in the headlamp's beams. The stretcher rose foot by foot, brushing the narrow walls of the crevice. Harlan's breaths came short and ragged. Gah. Hurts. I know, Ryder said. Keep breathing. We're halfway. The wind funneled through the shaft, a cold moan between the walls. It caught the stretcher and set it swaying. Ryder braced the line, trying to dampen it, but the gusts were erratic, tugging harder each time. Hold tension, he shouted. The reply came muffled. The stretcher swung again, then steadied. Then the next gust hit harder. It drifted into the wall and clipped a hanging shelf of ice. A faint crack sounded, like glass breaking deep inside the rock. Ryder looked up. The overhang glittered in his headlamp, a long, tapering icicle thick as a man's arm, shaking loose from its hold. Hold tension, he shouted again. The answer came garbled, wind-snatched, distant. The stretcher rocked harder. It clipped something sharp. Crack. Dot. A sound like frozen bone snapping in a fist. Ryder looked up. The overhang flashed in his headlamp, a jagged spear of ice the length of a man's leg, trembling, splitting, falling. Hold, they. Too late. The icicle dropped fast, spinning once like a thrown blade. It hit dead center, right between my eyes. I don't feel pain, only pressure, like the back of my skull's being shoved inward by a boot. Then a blinding pop, and the world drops out. My limbs go loose. I hear something wet hit the rock beneath me. Don't know if it's blood or part of my brain, or both. I try to suck in air, but my chest jerks instead. It doesn't know how anymore. My jaw locks open. My tongue flattens. No breath. No voice. There's heat behind my eyes, flooding out like a broken radiator. My teeth rattle once. Then nothing. The rope is still moving. The wind is still howling. I'm not in any of it. I can see Ryder, I think. He's above me. Maybe yelling. Maybe not. There's no sound. Just a roaring silence, like being buried in snow. I'm inside something now. Not a dream. Not memory. Something deeper. My arms twitch. My legs spasm. My bladder lets go. I don't care. My last thought isn't a person. Isn't God. Isn't forgiveness. It's a shape. Cold and black. The pit. I never left it. I never really got out. It just rose to meet me.